Every contact leaves a trace. Edmund Locard. This is the basic principle of forensic science. And this is Class Half Full. Hello everyone and welcome to episode 1 of Class Half Full. I am your host, my name is Darrow, and the first episode is titled What is Forensic Science? But before we dive deep into what forensic science is and where it all came from, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. So I am from Scotland, west of Scotland. I came from a town called Paisley, and I now live centrally in Scotland. Whilst I lived in Paisley, I studied there for my honours degree, which was in forensic science, before moving on to Strathclyde University for my postgraduate degree, which was in analytical chemistry. I currently work as an analytical chemist in the pharmaceutical industry. I specialise in gas chromatography and infrared spectroscopy, along with wet chemistry. My job history up until this point is I've worked in the whisky industry, testing whiskies. I've worked in environmental industry, doing some environmental testing. I've worked as a research assistant at the University of Glasgow, looking at pulmonary arterial hypertension. Also worked at the mass spectrometry corps, looking at congenital adrenal hyperplasia. One of the reasons why I wanted to start a podcast was to have that educational outlet to the world. I want to share my experience and share my knowledge. I used to, whilst I was at university, take classes and share my information on, try and help out where I can. So, enough about me. That was quick, brief. Let's dive right into the episode. So, what is forensic science? I want to start by breaking this down of the two words from forensics and science. So, forensics is the application of science to establish a series of events which can produce impartial evidence that can be used in a court of law. That could be criminal law or civil law. And science can be defined as a collection of information through systematic observations or experiments in order to understand processes in terms of how and why they happen. The word forensic comes from a Latin phrase known as forensis, and this came about from a Roman business place which was called a forum. So these forums is where we would have civil meetings or where criminal matters were discussed and debated. So you'd have your criminal and the accuser. They would present their arguments to a jury, or their version of a jury. And this is where the historic connection to modern day comes from. That's why legal evidence is presented in court. So in my opinion, forensic science is kind of like the modern day superhero trying to fight crime. Without any actual magical powers, it's just knowledge and systematic thinking to prove a point if it's there to be proven. So what does forensics all come down to? It comes down to evidence. Is it there? Is it not there? Evidence needs to be well understood, well analysed, and only by doing all this it becomes trustworthy. And for it to be trustworthy, the the methods that are getting used have to be validated, have to be reliable, and have to be accurate. The evidence itself has to be looked after. So when it gets bagged at the crime scene, for example, it'll all get taped over, and the crime scene examiners will sign and date over all the seals to make sure it's all tamper-proof. There's paperwork to fill out for traceability. If none of this is there, a legal defence team will absolutely shut it all down in seconds. No problem. So it all has to be there to be strong and to make your conviction. Who is it that does all these types of analysis? Well, it's the forensic scientist. And it's their job to discover and verify the exchange of materials. So this type of role was encapsulated by one man. This man was a medical doctor and a criminologist, and his name is Dr. Edmund Locard. Name sound familiar? It was the man that produced the quote at the start of the episode. And that quote, "Every contact leaves a trace," is known as Locard's exchange principle. Just think about that for a little while. Every contact leaves a trace. Every time you touch something, something's left behind. So what it implies in terms of a scene of a crime, a person could walk into a place that is going to be a crime scene, and they'll leave some of their matter behind, but also at the same time they will take some of the crime scene away. So if I describe to you a train where you go into the train and you sit in the seat, that seat you sat on, you're probably going to put skin cells and hair onto it, but someone obviously sat on that seat before you, so when you're getting off the train, you're going to be taking away other people's skin cells, other people's hair, fibres from the seat in the train, anything that was left on the table if you touched it. You'll be taking that away with you to wherever you're going. Pretty disgusting, right? Locard himself was one of the pioneers in terms of forensic science. He's responsible for the first crime lab, and that was in 1910, Lyon, France, and he created it in the loft of the police station. So I'm now going to go on and talk a little bit about the history. And it's going to be very, very brief, because a lot of the points that can be touched on will be covered in later episodes when we get more specific about the techniques and whatnot. So forensic science, the term itself is a fairly modern term. There's cases of said forensic science way before the term is even coined. We can think about Archimedes' principle, when he used his principle of water displacement to quantify, I guess you can say, the amount of gold that was in a crown. If that's something you guys would like me to get into more, I'd happily do so. It's quite an interesting scenario, let's call it. A lot of ifs and buts in it. But another example of forensics being used before the coin was even turned was with the good old famous Emperor Julius Caesar. The people conducting his autopsy came to a conclusion after doing so, saying that his cause of death was blood loss. That's starting to pave the way of how we use forensics today. If we jump forward a little bit to the 13th century, roughly around 1247, the Chinese magistrate Sun Si, may have butchered that a wee bit, apologies, he wrote a book, and this book was called Washing Away of the Wrongs. It's a very, very fascinating book. I'd highly recommend going and checking it out if you're interested into this type of thing. He started making descriptions and examples of post-mortem examinations. these descriptions also included explanations of what bodies look like due to different causes of death. This is actually thought to be one of the first attempts at cataloguing forensic observations, and these observations were passed as advice to investigators to help them out. If this is the case, it will be known as one of the oldest forensic texts in history. Sung Si we will be coming back to again. I'm not going to tell you what for, but a couple of clues to it will be if you link together some blood, a murder weapon and flies. Sung Si was very pivotal in this branch of forensic science, and some of the things he done back then we still do today. So if we fast forward a little bit to 1893, round about the late 1800s, forensic science was starting just to boom, and I really don't think it's stopped much. We're still advancing a wee bit and just making changes as we go. But in 1893, a man called Hans Gross, another pioneer of his time, he wrote another book called The Handbook for Coroners, Police Officials and Military Policemen. This book, it is amazing. It is pretty amazing. I used it during my undergrad for certain things, and for what he done for the time, it's pretty great. He combined different areas, psychology, photography, the scientific methods, and it drafted them all into this understandable guide to help police officials deal with their investigations. Another thing this man's very, very important for is he made all the arguments and all the grounding for standardisation and systematic approaches in forensic science. So you couldn't just create something and take it to court and be like, this proves that. There has to be a way, there has to be a systematic approach. You have to follow the rules of science. The two books I've just mentioned, I would highly recommend them. They're fantastic, and if you're into the history, it will give you a good grounding of what it was like back then to try and be a forensic scientist, try and make these observations. If you think back to cases like Jack the Ripper, forensically it was handled very, very, very poorly. So these people were trying their best to push forward to help so these types of things don't happen again. Over the centuries, many branches of forensic sciences have been developed, and they come in different complexities. They're all used to catch criminals, or even prove innocence. You're innocent until proven guilty. So we have different places like digital tracing. The digital team will do that. There's people that specialise in computer generated reconstructions of crime scenes. There's lab-based investigations with tissue, hair, fibres, DNA. There's even simple applications to just counting maggots on a body. They all tell something, and they're all pivotal to an investigation. Several branches will be used in any one case. Something like DNA on its own, despite its real high probability, using it on its own, you couldn't create a case. You couldn't do what? Make the conviction. So this application of science to collect, analyse and interpret evidence which can reconstruct events in history, in modern times, investigations. It'll help you identify victims and even pinpoint perpetrators. It's all like the modern day crime fighting superhero, I quite like to say. I definitely think it's the best way of looking at it. It's nothing like CSI that we see on telly. where one person is the police investigator, the evidence collector, the analyzer. They'll get some evidence and chuck it through what they call a mass spectrometer, and they'll get a result in 2 seconds without any prep work, without anything. There's absolutely nothing like that. I do agree the CSI effect created a lot of people interested in science, but I also think it gave a lot of people false expectations. They're expected to pick up a hair sample and analyse it in seconds, and they've solved the crime, they're away to interview suspects and whatnot. Absolutely nothing like that. Actually, in fact, forensic science itself, I know in this country, Scotland, we have examiners who collect evidence and whatnot, and it gets bagged, and then it gets sent off away to the scientists within the labs, and they'll analyse the evidence. So yeah, like I said, quick and brief with a small tangent. I'd just like to thank you all for listening in. Was a short episode. I'm still trying to find my way with this. Still trying to find my way with the sound, how to structure it, my episodes, what to put in it. So any feedback will be greatly appreciated. You can find me on Twitter at class_half, or on Instagram at class_half_full6. If you want to send any questions to me, you can do it via a voice message on the Anchor app, if you know how to do that, or you can send me messages to my email address, which is classhalffull@outlook.com, and hope to hear from you soon. I can give you a clue to what the second episode is going to be, and it will be a much longer one, much more in depth, more science in it. I guess we can say, what does bleach and blood have in common? If you figure out what the next episode is going to be, message me, let me know what you think. I might let you know if you're right or wrong. But until next time, and for the very first time, that is class dismissed. Thank you.